Let's see, am I going to manage to win the 50-50 this time, or at least get Jean? Well, seeing as I spent 150 wishes, surely I got pretty close to C6 Sara. Good day, everyone. Today I will be giving my thoughts and explaining certain mechanics behind the Raiden Shogun and Kujou Sara. Ordinarily, I would probably do each character individually. However, I do think Kujou Sara highlights a potential issue that A.N. could bring to the game. Now, starting with Raiden Shogun, before I give my opinions on her, I first want to go through all of her abilities and explain certain mechanics, and what I find surprisingly good about her and surprisingly lackluster. There's not much to talk about with respect to her normals, as you just basically aren't going to use these, unless you build her as physical, which I would highly suggest not doing. Now this is a bit of a shame, because her charge attack is extremely smooth and satisfying to use. It practically has no end lag at all, allowing you to just weave normal attack into charge attack, into normal attack, into charge attack, and has this very nice crescent moon effect upon using. Getting into the surprisingly good, I would say, is her elemental skill. And the reason why I find this surprisingly good is because the biggest issue with Electro characters is that, really, for most teams, you don't want to be applying Electro, and yet Electro characters, generally speaking, are constantly applying Electro in completely uncontrollable ways. Now, Raiden Shogun's elemental skill, which sort of follows along this line, is far more controllable. First, it only triggers upon you dealing damage. It only does a single hit of damage, only procs once every about 1 second, and is subject to the normal 3-hit rule. This means that even in a team comp that you don't necessarily want to be applying Electro, she can still be used if you plan your rotation around making sure her elemental skill won't proc in a way that will ruin your elemental reactions. A good showing of this is Hu Tao and Zincho Vaporize. Generally speaking, you wouldn't want to use a character like, say, Beidou here, as the constant applying of Electro with Beidou's ultimate will render Zincho no longer able to apply enough Hydro to vaporize all of Hu Tao's charge stack. However, with Raiden, you can, by simply making sure that Hu Tao's normal attack being off cooldown does not align with Raiden Shogun's elemental skill being off cooldown. While it may make it a bit more difficult, you can also use her in freeze comps. As you can see here, even though we have Raiden's elemental skill constantly proccing, we are still able to actually keep Omen on the enemy. It will certainly make it harder, but it can work. So in freeze teams and reverse vaporize teams, she does have the possibility of working. So in that regard, I feel she's automatically better than the majority of Electro characters in the game. The surprisingly lackluster part of her, however, I would have to say, is the damage that she gets in her burst. Now, as a quick explanation of how it functions, it's simply, as it states, other characters using their bursts give her resolve stacks, and those resolve stacks are then turned into additional modifiers onto the burst part of her burst, and her following normals and charge attacks, which are changed into a sword and electro damage. And while she hits with these normal and charge attacks once a second up to 5 times, she can restore energy for the party, and this is the aspect of her that allows her to perform as a battery. Now, in terms of damage, with the stats I currently have on her, and only looking at critical values, we can see that the first hit of her normal attacks and her burst does about 6,200 damage. Now, as the increase from 6 to 7 seems to be about a 7% damage increase, at level 10, I would expect this to deal around 30% more damage, so about 8k instead, and substituting an R5 catch for the Favonius Lance that I currently have would probably get us to somewhere around 9.5 thousand. Now this isn't a small number, but at the same time, it isn't going to be able to compete with the high damage dealing characters in the game. As one team comp that you might choose to use her in is with Eula, I'm not sure that she'll even out DPS Eula's normals during her burst. Her charge attacks are a worse story. For some reason, they gave Raiden, for a 5-star sword character, extremely low charge attack modifiers, despite, unlike her normal charge attack, having a very hefty starting and ending time. To compare, even at full resolve stacks, she only does about 16,000 damage, whereas a similar-ish Ayaka who would have far higher crit rate, is doing about 5,600 3 times, and so about 17,000. Now they are 3 talent levels apart, and so Raiden would end up doing more damage with her charge attacks than, say, Ayaka, means that she would likely easily be out DPS'd spamming charge attacks by Kaching spamming charge attacks. Forgot to put this in originally. But also, as Raiden's ultimate only lasts for 7 seconds, we probably want to try to figure out a good rotation to make the most out of it. Now, from my testings and calculations, charge attack spamming is actually not worth it. You can get about 5 charge attacks off within that period of time, which at level 6 and full resolve would yield 2,157%. 2 normals into a charge attack is even less, with 3 normals into a charge attack having the most potential if you can manage to do 3 sets of 3 normals into a charge attack and finish with an additional charge attack. However, I personally could not do this, so I'm not sure if it's actually possible without some sort of attack speed bonus. Doing 4 normals into a charge attack has incredible lag in between the 4th normal and the charge attack, and so doing this continuously is probably not the best bet. And so from what I was able to pull off, it seemed as though doing 2 sets of 3 normals into a charge attack, followed by 4 normals into a charge attack, yielded the highest amount of damage with 2,270%. But if you can manage to do the 3 sets of 3 normals into a charge attack, followed by a final charge attack, this would easily be the highest with 2,500%. So I think you shall just have to try and find what works best for you. Her burst part itself, because it will have such a nice multiplier, will do a very decent chunk of damage, but it once again still won't really compete with the damage that other characters' bursts do. Beidou, in certain scenarios, will do drastically more damage. Ayaka's burst would also deal drastically more damage. And then characters like, say, Mona, who have a single hit burst that they can vaporize, will once again do significantly more damage. So I feel here as well, she kind of falls into a decent but not great category. Then the final thing really to talk about her burst is the energy that it generates. And as energy generation goes in the game, it is very good. If you look at the other Archons, say Venti, they are kind of considered to be the best at their role. Venti is essentially the best gatherer in the game, whereas Zhongli has the biggest shield in the game, in addition to doing practically everything else that you could want aside from gathering. And seeing the Electro Traveler being a battery and Electro Resonance giving Electro Energy Particles, it seems as though Electro is supposed to be an element that revolves around energy. She does fall into that place of being the best at that role. But the issue here is that the other instances of that role just aren't very good. Now the issue here isn't that she's amazing at it, that she will allow you to run full damage on all your other characters and give them the energy that they need to be able to use their bursts off cooldown, but rather she's the best because the other sources in the game just aren't actually that good. A great example of this is to look at the Favonius Lance, which is a fantastic energy recharge weapon, and its ability gives 6 energy to the party, which isn't exactly a tremendous amount, and yet it's one of the best ways to give some party members some energy. I do think if Raiden gave enough energy with her burst to allow all characters to go all damage and then just completely spam their bursts, she would probably be in a better position, but she isn't that strong of a battery. She's good, but not that good. The one final thing to mention about her ultimate and her elemental skill is that her elemental skill will only proc if you deal damage. So against enemies that are shielded and you cannot do damage to, the coordinated attack will not occur. The energy recharge on her burst, however, does not need to deal damage, it simply needs to come in contact. So fortunately, if you needed to, you can still generate energy for the party against shielded units. Now understanding that Raiden gives a small damage bonus to characters' bursts based on how costly they are, that she is a general battery for the entire party, and that her own sub-DPS damage depends upon other characters having high-cost ultimates, this honestly makes building a team that really suits her rather difficult, as there just aren't many characters in the game who have 80 cost ultimates, and then adding on top of that 80 cost ultimates that do the majority of their damage. Ayaka would seem to be a great contender, as she, in a way, fits all the requirements there. 80 cost ultimate does the vast majority of her damage with her ultimate and needs a battery. However, she also kind of needs a Hydro character in order to be able to properly hit enemies with her ultimate. Her ultimate is incredibly small, so if you want to be able to hit multiple enemies with it, you probably need an Nemo character that can gather, and then you probably need a healer, and that pretty much takes up all the slots on her team. And so it's likely very difficult to put Raiden in there with her. And even if you did, Raiden would really only be buffing Ayaka. Beidou seems like a perfect fit for Raiden Shogun. However, unfortunately, as the normals and charge attacks in her burst are considered burst damage, which is the only reason she can do any damage to begin with, thanks to the Emblem of Fate set, she cannot proc Beidou's ultimate. And so it makes running these two in the same party very difficult. Xingqiu pretty much works with Raiden, as he can be basically slapped onto any team, as you're generally not focusing specifically on him, as his ultimate does good damage, but it's not to the level of Ayaka or Beidou. Thus, the only other characters that would really kind of fit the bill would be Eula, who has a high cost, high damage ultimate and needs energy, and then also possibly Zhao. But Zhao has very little downtime if you can give him the energy that he needs, so I'm not sure it actually makes sense to use Raiden here, as she will essentially take up at least about 9 seconds, instead of just using, say, Sucrose to try and give Zhao the energy he needs that way. And then, of course, there's also the newly added Kujou Sara. However, against non-massive enemies, she basically won't do any more damage with her ultimate than Amber. And so I cannot say is exactly a massive burst damage dealer. And so because of this, at the present time, there unfortunately just isn't a great number of characters that really fit what Raiden Shogun brings to the party and what she needs out of the party. You can, of course, buff her up a bunch by using your Kazuha and your Bennett and then some other character. But none of these characters need Raiden Shogun to function, and so her spot would be much better given to a character that does in fact deal a massive amount of damage. Now just briefly coming back to it, it definitely is a massive shame that Beidou does not work with Raiden Shogun, as the team I had originally been thinking to use was going to be Raiden Shogun, obviously, Noelle, as she could perform the role of the sub DPS for when Raiden is outside of her burst, while also being the healer and shielder of the group that you could also give the Archaic Petra set to, and if you were to use an all-electro team, would then mean giving all 3 of the other characters a 35% additional damage bonus. And so then going off of that, you could of course then use Beidou, who does a massive amount of damage, and then so you should hopefully, as they are also the same element, be able to go pretty much full damage into her, and then finally following up with Kujou Sara, mostly if you had managed to get her to C6, as then she would provide both Beidou and Raiden Shogun a large damage spike, while also dealing an okay amount of damage herself, in part thanks to Noelle's, Archaic Petra, and Raiden Shogun's ease damage bonuses. However, unless they change the way Raiden Shogun works with Beidou, which personally I don't think they will, this type of team comp simply doesn't really work, and so there just isn't much in the way of options that really suit Raiden Shogun currently in the game. If we go into the future and continue to get more characters that have high cost bursts, that do most of their damage with their bursts, and that need a battery, then I think Raiden Shogun's place in the game will be better. Now in terms of team comps, aside from simply fitting Raiden into whatever group that you are currently using, some good ones could be using her with Xingqiu, Jingling, and Bennett. Bennett will obviously give everybody in the party a much needed attack bonus. Xingqiu and Raiden will be causing electroconduct, which hopefully should be balanced enough so that Jingling can vaporize and overload all of her pyro hits. Now for me and the team comp I am going to try to use in the New Abyss is Hu Tao, Xingqiu, Raiden Shogun, and Diona. I have thought about using other healers here, as Diona really kind of does nothing for Raiden Shogun aside from having a level 80 ultimate, but aside from Bennett, who probably makes significantly more sense in the other group, I don't really think any of the other healers would add anything else to the party, as Sayu would not be able to resistance shred Pyro for Hu Tao, and attempting to resistance shred Electro for Raiden Shogun could be wonky with Xingqiu also constantly applying Hydro. Now getting into Kujou Sara, her normal and charge attacks are nothing special, and the main reason to use her comes from her E, or more specifically, the attack bonus that you can give to a single character with her E. Now the way this works is that when you activate her E, she will do a short teleport, which will then cause her next charge attack to leave a feather on the ground that will then explode and give the character inside of it an attack bonus, very similar to Bennett, based on her base attack. Now this arrow does not have to hit an enemy, you can simply shoot it into the ground if your main purpose is to simply get the attack buff, as the attack itself does not exactly do all that much damage anyway. Now this attack bonus cannot stack with other forms of the attack bonus, so that's something to keep in mind. The attack bonus itself is lesser than Bennett's, but it's still a good attack increase. However, it only lasts 6 seconds, which makes it difficult to decide how you're going to use it. As it only applies to a single character, that means it doesn't really work for quickswap teams, as you would rather give that attack bonus to all the characters. And so Bennett would obviously work better. It also really isn't very good for a hyper carry, as it only lasts 6 seconds. And so you would very likely be better off using a different character. And then as for characters who have a type of stance change, like say Hu Tao, Yoimiya, and Raiden, the attack bonus is so short that it will not boost a large portion of their damage. Even with Raiden Shogun, who she was clearly built to go with, even though her state only lasts 7 seconds, her burst itself will still take about 2 seconds to occur, and so you'll likely only have about 4 seconds out of the 7 seconds with Kujou Sara's buff. That also means that she really cannot work with Eula, as Eula's buff is not a snapshot from when she activates it, and takes 7 seconds before it goes off. Now because this state in which she activates this attack buff lasts so long, you can essentially stagger it to give it to one character and then another character, or to give it to one character for longer. However, you have to, of course, swap back to them. So once again, characters like Raiden Shogun, Eula, Yoimiya, Child, and Hu Tao, Razor, simply won't work with this. Then we get into her ultimate. And her ultimate against non-massive enemies essentially does about the same amount of damage as Amber's, despite the fact that it has twice the energy cost and a much longer cooldown. And the only other thing that it does is give the exact same attack bonus as her elemental skill. Now looking at Bennett, who once again does about the same thing, gives the attack bonus, does decently less damage, as this is obviously level 8 instead of level 1, but is pyro so you can melt it and so deal about the same, perhaps even more damage, and heals for a ton for twice the duration and yet has an energy cost of 60. So I do have to wonder, why does her burst cost 80 energy? At best, it should cost 60. There is no reason for it to cost 80 in my mind, aside from making her work better with Raiden. And that is the potential issue in which I brought up at the beginning of the video that Raiden could possibly bring to the game. There is the possibility that in order to make Raiden Shogun seem better, some future characters might have inflated ultimate costs versus what they actually do. Now, getting a bunch of new characters with 80 energy costs in and of itself, I don't think is at all a bad thing, as many of the characters in the game who have 80 energy costs have amazing ultimates. Now, having gotten this potential issue off my chest, we should talk about one mechanic I do need to explain, specifically how the attack bonus is given through her ultimate, as that is much less clear and can be abused. Her burst, very similar to her elemental skill, gives the attack bonus to the active character that is within the area. Now this area includes both the initial hit, but also the following smaller lightning strikes. So, what you can do is you can use Kujou Sara's ultimate, swap to a different character to give them the attack bonus from the lightning strike, then follow that lightning and swap to another character to give that character as well the attack bonus. So in this way, you can use her burst to actually give the attack bonus to multiple characters. Now, of course, this does mean cutting her already incredibly short attack bonus duration even shorter, but does at least lead to the possibility of being able to give her attack bonus to multiple characters. She also regenerates some energy for the party, however it is so small that I personally pretty much dismiss this. Finally, having gone through both characters and their abilities and mechanics, to give my opinions, I feel that Raiden Shogun is a good character, not a great character, that currently doesn't have a very good place in the game due to what she wants and what the characters that currently exist are. Kujou Sara for me is an overall shame, as both her appearance and animations are fantastic, but has an attack bonus whose duration is much too short for most characters to make much use out of, has a very difficult time giving it to more than one character, and has a burst that costs too much for what it does. And with that, I think we reached the end of the video. Did you pull for Raiden and or Kujou Sara? If you have, how do you feel about them? Do you feel that my cons for these characters are unwarranted? Did you not know that Kujou Sara's ultimate could technically be given to multiple characters? And if so, armed with that knowledge, how do you plan to use her? What teams do you plan to try using with Raiden Shogun? Along with anything else that you would like me to know, please do leave down below in the comments. Thank you for watching, look forward to seeing you again next time, and hope you all have a great day.